Ahoy, ahoy! Welcome in. This is the True North Fantasy Football Program, sponsored by Monkey Knife Fight. Very proud members of the Fantasy Points Media Group. I'm Tyrell McLaughlin at TNFF Tyrell, at TNFF Pod, at True North FFB is where the whole crew can be found. The best information, guys, by the best people is what we want to surround ourselves with right around this time of the year when we are really kicking back into redraft mode. And fantasypoints.com is that the best information from the best people. And tonight I have a co-owner, the director of Dank Stats from the mothership, here to kick off running back week on the TNFF pod. We have a really big guest on Thursday as well, guys, man alive, but it's really almost impossible to top tonight's guest. I know he doesn't love my super complimentary intros, but you know, he's so busy, but his work ethic is kind of only surpassed by his generosity with his time. So Mr. Scott Barrett, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I was chatting with you for much of the day today. I have my guys coming out tomorrow or the day after. That's my biggest piece of the year. That's where I list my Exodia plays, my must drafts, strategy for each position and for your draft as a whole. And I just wanted to make sure that my rankings were on point. It's better you point out, oh, that's stupid, before 10 of the readers pointed out tomorrow. So I appreciate your help earlier today with that, and we talked running back a little bit already. Luckily, there's not too many disagreements, but really happy to come on. Excited to talk this out because fleshing this out helps me with my process. So it should be a good show. Big fan of you guys, and excited to talk to you today.
No, you continue to give me a big head. I got the Barrett bump. I'm sure everybody saw that the last week. It was just incredible getting the shout out from you. I really appreciate it, and it was really incredible. The follow, just the follows went through the roof. I've never seen anything like that. And it's just amazing to me because you're so busy. You know what I mean? Like I was saying before the show, I probably abused your kindness a little bit here. Failing to reach out a little sooner, but and I'm gonna talk a lot more running backs on this one too. Forewarned, this is almost entirely running backs because I feel bad because it seems like I'm making you talk running backs constantly when I have you on the show, but it goes back to like your running back models for these rookies, like how well-rounded you are in this industry, just operating on all ends of the spectrum from DFS to these rookie models. And I just really appreciate how you attack the running back position. We know it's a very, very important position in fantasy football. And, I talked to you about just you crush the grind and you're as busy as about anybody in the industry. So I just wanted to throw out there that a lot of this is going to be based off the Bell Cow report, which is just an amazing piece. And I wanted to just express how much I love dissecting the running back position and just how big of a resource I think some of your work is when it comes to the running back position. And Scott, it's kind of that time of the year where a lot of people are flocking back to fantasy football, and not people who are super dialed in like us, who are just in the trenches all year long. It's kind of everybody coming back to it now. And I can't think of a better person to ask this kind of really difficult question, but what do you recommend fantasy gamers who are just getting back into the swing of things? What should they be doing? Like what kind of materials should they have at their disposal, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I think it's good and it's important that we're spending so much time on the running back position. It is far and away the most valuable, most important position in fantasy. And whether or not you win or lose your league, that's typically going to be determined on how good your running backs are. Do you have the right, one of the right, 3 to 5 league winners? And, 2 years ago, it was just McCaffrey. Like if you had McCaffrey, you had 80% chance of making it to your championship. So really just hitting on the right running backs is so important. What would I recommend to someone who's just getting into the swing of things? This is going to sound, I don't know, sort of egotistical, but yeah, check out my author page on fantasypoints.com and read all of my recent work. Read the Bell Cow report, read Upside Wins Championships, read last year's Bell Cow or Bust, the optimal running back draft strategy. If you want to be a game theory optimal player, you need to read those articles. My guys, again, comes out tomorrow, the next day. And ideally with that, like you don't need to read anything else. So you just read that one article and you are golden. So that's what I try to do with that. But yeah, I mean, if you're coming in late, you don't have quite the edge that you and me have, Ty, where we're drafting in 100+ best ball leagues. So we know ADP like the back of our hand. We know risers and fallers, news, notes coming out from beat reporters and all the different teams, but still see no reason why you can't dominate your league, especially if it's a friends and family home league. Like, I don't know, you should dominate that if you're listening to this podcast.
Absolutely. And that's why I like, because you really get into the approach in a lot of these aspects too, like even before you break down some of your tables and things like that. Like I think of one piece that you left out there that I swear by is your strength of schedule metric. I think that's an invaluable resource. I think it's an underrated resource as well because of how noisy the word strength of schedule, it's kind of a trigger word in the old fantasy industry, but your strength of schedule metric is something that I've always sworn by. Not unlike the bell cow report, like I just really enjoy reading all that stuff. And like you said, it's just because running back is a lot harder. I'll put it that way. Like wide receiver is easy, guys. Don't worry about it. You can, wide receiver is pretty easy to figure out. And the ADP, the hit rates, we know where we have to draft wide receivers and all that stuff. Whereas running backs is kind of a crapshoot from season to season, or at least from half decade to the next half decade, so to speak. So maybe before we get into it, Scott, when you do your bell cow report, some of the terminology you use, I think might come up from me throughout this episode. Do you think you could define it a little bit, like how you describe a bell cow or a workhorse or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, 90% of fantasy analysis across the industry is basically like, here are the players I like relative to ADP. And I intentionally try to dive into the overarching strategy. Again, trying to be a game theory optimal player, because that's really where your edge is at the end of the day. ADP is getting sharper and sharper. There's, quote unquote, no such thing as a sleeper anymore. And that's fairly true to a degree. But yes, you have to have strategy down. And a key point to me, basically optimal in a start sit league is you want to go RB to start, or, if you're in a 10-team league, or if one of my tier 3 running backs falls to round 3, RB to start, 3 RBs to start. And then you neglect the position. You adopt a quality over quantity approach. And so we see with quarterbacks, basically there's the Konami code quarterbacks and everyone else. That's the hyper mobile quarterbacks and then the statues, right? And the tight end position, I draw a similar distinction. I call it the oligarchs, basically top 15 fantasy wide receivers masquerading as tight ends. I call it the oligarchs because of the death of the middle class of the position. Basically, the tight end position is ruled by a wealthy elite, and there's no middle. It's after, the big three. Basically, everyone's the same. There's actually guys I like who might break into that tier. But with the running back position, I have a number of important but arbitrary distinctions. And the first is the cream of the crop, your Konami code running back is a bell cow running back who's going to rank highly in snaps, carries, targets, snap share, carry share, target share, and ideally inside the red zone as well. And that's going to be regardless of game script. And then you have the workhorse running backs.
And just really quick, Scott, like how many of those do you expect in a season? Like, are we talking 1, 2, or 3? Are we talking 5, 6, or 7?
Yeah. So there's typically about 5.6 per season. Last year was an all-time outlier year. There was one, and that's to meet the necessary, snap share, the necessary games played. But really, it's just like a vague term. I don't have like I used to use it has to be 66% of the team snaps, 66% of the team's backfield carries, 66% of the team's backfield targets. But now it's just something like broader, tougher to define. I don't want to be as strict with it.
Yeah.
But basically,
and for workhorses, like so you are expecting a handful of them this year after a down season though last year?
Honestly, about maybe 6 to 10, but last year was an all-time outlier year. And there's a lot of guys to be really excited about. Saquon was hurt. McCaffrey was hurt. Zeke, Jesus, like everything that went wrong with Zeke. So, the bell cow running backs, the most valuable players in all of fantasy. Who's going to lead in win rate? It's going to be the number 1 highest scoring running back. We saw that last year, the year before, then the number 2, then the number 3, then the number 4, then maybe Travis Kelce or Javonte Adams. But Yeah, and so a workhorse running back, Derrick Henry is the highest ideal of a workhorse running back. Nick Chubb is up there. Jonathan Taylor's up there. And that's a committee back who handles the bulk of the rushing work. That's where the bulk of their value comes from, their fantasy points comes from ground game production and efficiency and rushing touchdowns. And then typically the other committee style back would be a scat back. That's like a James White, Nyheim Hines, JD McKissick last year, was really only used in the passing game. And I really steer clear of workhorse running backs and scat backs. Scat backs are great in best ball. They're just about useless in start sit. If you're starting James White more than as a bye week fill-in, your team's in trouble, right? And so committee backs, I mean, Derrick Henry was a monster last year. Taylor, Chubb were monsters last year, despite playing on 50% of the team snaps. There's more for Henry, but 50% for Chubb and Taylor. You have to be extremely hyper efficient. You need positive game script. They need to be double-digit win teams. They need lots of red zone drives. So it needs to be a good offense, a good offensive line. There's so many things that could go wrong. And then even with everything going right, they're going to be massively game script sensitive. So like Derrick Henry over the past 3 seasons averages like 22 fantasy points per game and wins, but like 11 in losses. He's basically unstartable in losses. So I try and get my exposure to those guys in DFS in weeks they're heavily favored. Then the other arbitrary distinctions are, there's the handcuff running back. There's whatever the hell Cordarrelle Patterson is. There's the, I think, sort of wide receiver masquerading as a running back, you could say, with Alvin Kamara, Austin Ekeler, maybe Travis Etienne if he's used like Percy Harvin and Curtis Samuel. But those are the important but arbitrary distinctions I make.
No, I think those are all really good points. And we're actually not going to hit a lot of the workhorse or, the high-end bell cows. We're definitely going to leave out of this conversation. But what I'm planning to do tonight is just to go through where we're going to have to draft these running backs in drafts. I put in a bunch of pockets of running backs together that we're going to have to decide between. You can only take one kind of situation when you look at where they're being drafted in fantasy drafts. And we're going to start right at the first, second round turn there. So the 3 guys I picked out, Scott, Nick Chubb, Austin Ekeler, and Aaron Jones. If you're picking, who are you picking out of those 3? Out of Nick Chubb, Austin Ekeler, and Aaron Jones?
So I think you told me before this episode, you're going to try not to give too much away, but I really spell everything out in this article for those of you who want to subscribe. So out of Aaron Jones, Nick Chubb, and Austin Ekeler, Jones and Ekeler, it's basically a tie. It feels really, really tight. I have a slight lean to Aaron Jones. I don't know how great I feel about it. Then I have Nick Chubb in an entirely different tier. Again, like Kareem Hunt's going to take, Chubb's capped at like 50% of the team snaps with Kareem Hunt there. He's going to be highly game script sensitive. He needs to remain one of the top 3 most efficient running backs in football. He needs a perfect offensive line. He needs ideal game script. The team won 75% of their games last year when he played. And he just doesn't have the bell cow upside I see in Aaron Jones or Austin Ekeler have. Again, neither one is like a Barkley McCaffrey type. But Eckler's role as basically Alvin Kamara light, that's very valuable. And then Jones is really frustrating to me because he is not a workhorse. He's not a scat back. He's just like, for whatever reason,
really good at football, which is important. And also like forever capped at like 60% of the snaps. And he sees near even usage in both the rushing and passing game. It's an elite offense. With Jamal Williams out, if you look at it by the carries and targets he's leaving behind, it's actually like not a massive bump for Aaron Jones, but he also leaves behind a lot of empty snaps. For whatever reason, he played a high number of snaps and just didn't see the ball on a lot of those snaps. And you have to think, those snaps are going to be less empty with Jones, taking that work. We'll talk about AJ Dillon. I know you like AJ Dillon. There's concern that, hey, maybe they just love him and want to give him 15 carries per game. But he's definitely going to be a non-factor in the passing game, which I think is important. It certainly helps Jones. No, totally. And that's why I like Jones is kind of the offense. And like, I think people are underrating the situation a little bit because I agree that the bump might be a little bit exaggerated with Jamal Williams, but I also think there's like a weird complex where Aaron Jones has always been, they're just trying to keep a brother down for some reason. I don't know what it is with Aaron Jones, but people refuse to buy efficiency sometimes. And I think he's been nothing but that. I think it's been thanks to the team and the situation at times. I think last year he showed via yards after contact that he could very much do it himself. And I just think, I don't expect Rodgers to put up another supernatural season. We're talking about these running backs who don't have the pass catching upside. They need to have this confluence of events, almost a supernatural season to pay off their ADP or to have that top 5 season. That's what Aaron Rodgers did last year. And I have a tough time believing he's going to do it again at 38 years old. And we've seen about 5,000 yards from scrimmage from the running backs in this offense in the 2 seasons under LaFleur. So I think there's a lot of room for the running backs to pay off, at least Aaron Jones to finally correct on some of the things that people have really been held back on like why they've been a little bit reluctant, I think. We're both really high on Antonio Gibson because I'm looking at this second round turn. Would you take Antonio Gibson over Joe Mixon and Najee Harris? These are the 3 guys I have here. Antonio Gibson, Joe Mixon, and Najee Harris.
Yeah, I'd take him over Najee Harris, and where it gets tricky is versus Joe Mixon because I am crazy high on Mixon and Gibson, dangerously high. So when this article dropped, I'll tease it. You'll have to read my guys tomorrow to see where ultimately they land. But I wrote this article, and then shortly afterwards, our NFL insider over at fantasypoints.com, Adam Kaplan, told us that yeah, they are working hard to phase J.D. McKissic out of the passing game and to give far more work to Antonio Gibson. There was a report today, Roto-World retweeted it, talking about how he's now playing in the hurry-up offense. That's huge. And so what I outlined in the article is, and the argument's very similar for both players. Joe Mixon, okay, you give him 50% of what Giovanni Bernard leaves behind, and he's a bell cow, and he's an easy top 5 fantasy running back. You give Antonio Gibson 50% of J.D. McKissic, and he's easily a top 5 fantasy running back, 70%, and he's like basically Christian McCaffrey. It's insane. McKissic led the league in targets last year. And so the big thing with Gibson was, I told you before the show, he was one of my circle your draft players. And him alongside Cam Akers, and both kind of, I think the process was good. The results weren't great due to injury. And in Gibson's case, Scott Turner came out and he said, the plan is to give Gibson more and more work as the season progresses. And he said that just about a few weeks prior to his injury. His last game prior to injury, he had season highs in snap share, carries, targets, fantasy points scored. 20 carries, 7 targets, 36.6 fantasy points, and then he got hurt. So, I really think had he stayed healthy, this is a guy everyone's you're taking him in round 1 in every single draft. And, upside is sky high. As a former wide receiver, and then what did he do last year? He was basically a workhorse running back despite 30 career carries in college, and he was great at it. He ranked, 9th in rushing fantasy points per game. So he really has a 2016, sophomore year David Johnson upside. He has McCaffrey upside.
He's got the size of David Johnson too. That's what's lost on a lot of people is that he could easily fill that niche of pass protection in third downs and in hurry up offenses.
He's a Jonathan Taylor clone. You just look at their combine side by side. It's the same thing. And they're both
the combine did such a disservice listing him as a wide receiver. Exactly. I've never seen anything like that. Yeah, I think Antonio Gibson is that guy, and it goes back to one of the reasons I was really high on him was your post-draft press conference article series. I always love that one. And some of the comments from Washington, were kind of hinting at the CMC, DC, Antonio Gibson thing. And like you were getting at, he really just did a lot of the things that people were worried he might not be able to do coming out of Memphis. That very, everything we were worried about, he kind of did last year. And we just need that pass catching for him to be delivering that upside. But when it comes to Joe Mixon, I wonder where that market share would come from a little bit more. When we think of Zach Taylor, we think of this offense heaping 70% of the market share onto the wide receiver position. Is it as simple as, like you were kind of saying, that as long as he gets a little bit of what Gio leaves behind, he can turn into that bell cow? So you do think this is the year for Joe Mixon for sure?
Yeah, and I've never really been a Mixon guy. So like everyone's in my DM like mentions like, oh, I can't go back to the Mixon well. He's burned me so many times. I'm like, well, this is the first time I'm pretty high. So he averaged 19.8 carries, 4.3 targets per game when healthy last year. That ranks second best by XFP per game. And that was with Giovanni Bernard. That was with the Bengals just winning one game when he was healthy. So that was brutal game script. And so, yeah. I mean, I'm envisioning massive upside. He's long been one of the most game script dependent players in fantasy, but I don't see that being the case if he gets that passing down work. And every report out of camp is he's going to get that passing down work. One of the beat writers said 80+% of the team snaps. And that's when my ears perk up. Snaps and snap share is the most important position stat for fantasy running backs. I mean, maybe XFP and weighted opportunity, my two stats, but the more simplistic stats, like it just snaps. And like, that is obscene usage. The only question to me with Mixon is health. But granted, that's a big question.
Yeah, offensive and that might be baked in at this point. That might be a little bit baked in because something is baked into his price at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. Offensive line, okay, but
well, that might be my worry, Scott. Like I shit on this offense quite a bit. I'm pretty good at it, but I will give him credit when credit's due. Like they bring in what's his face? I think Frank Pollock is the offensive line coach. Sounds kind of silly, but he, Mixon had a career year. Like he comes back to Cincinnati. He was in with the Jets last year, and I think they're going to run a lot more outside zone. They ran the most inside zone in 2020. So I think a lot of this will help Joe Mixon. I still have questions about Joe Burrow in that offensive line, though, for sure.
Yeah, so the offensive line is definitely a concern, but the great thing with bell cows is you can really rise above that due to work in the passing game.
Yeah.
Weighted opportunity. I talk about, targets are like 2.75 times as valuable as a carry for a fantasy running back. Outside of the red zone, it's like 4.5 times. So that's a really important point. Remember, he had 4.3 targets per game last year. Giovanni Bernard, 3.7. So I do expect him to rise above that. And you think about the offensive line and you think about Joe Burrow with his potentially gimpy knee. And I actually just moved the Cincinnati wide receivers down a bit in my rankings. Because I worry, what if Burrow is somewhat of a check down Charlie just with that knee and that offensive line? I mean, who's going to benefit then? It's going to be the quick dump offs to the
No, that's a really good point. And I think one thing we can say about Mixon, like people can argue about these guys, there's no doubt that he falls inside of that running back dead zone that people are kind of making famous now. Like it's kind of like the running back dead zone seems like the worst kept secret in fantasy football right now. All of a sudden, it feels like late round quarterback a few years ago. So what are your thoughts on the running back dead zone? Is that how you approach a draft? You kind of hinted off the top that it very much is your style. And when you think of that, does that put you off of guys like a DeAndre Swift, like a J.K. Dobbins, just because they're going in the third round? Or do you try and identify one or two of those guys?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really care too much about the historical dead zone bust rates and things like that, especially with running back. Bust rates miss the point. It could be true that you have a higher hit rate at wide receiver, but you have nowhere near the ceiling. It's not where league winners come from. League winners are running backs. Where does my dead zone start? Typically like round 3 in a 12-team league. That's my tier 4 running backs and beyond, but that's not Mixon. Mixon's tier 2 for me. I feel really good about that. You kind of play it by ear, and it's like guys with bell cow upside, bell cow potential with some degree of safety. Like I like Myles Gaskin a lot. I think he has really underrated bell cow upside, but he does carry a lot of risk. So he's tier 5 for me, but tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And ideally I'm going RB or RB to start. If a tier 3 running back is still there in round 3.
So who do you like more out of DeAndre Swift or J.K. Dobbins? And does it come down, because we're talking a lot about volume here and snaps and stuff, but the type of volume is obviously very important, and you've done a lot of work, I stay on the safe side. Just say it's a target is worth about 2.5 times as much as a rush attempt, in a vacuum when it comes to fantasy football. Does a stat like that just make you gravitate towards a DeAndre Swift over a J.K. Dobbins, or is the offense so appetizing in Baltimore and the offense so dreadful in Detroit that maybe that paradigm shifts?
Yeah, you keep picking out the two players I have right next to each other where I've gone back and forth in their rankings quite a few times.
Yeah, just say roster construction dependent then,
No. I settled on a Swift above J.K. Dobbins. With Swift, I'm thinking like Ekeler light, where you're hoping he's a sort of wide receiver masquerading as a running back, which should be very valuable and on one of the worst teams in the league that should lean very pass heavy, that doesn't really have any wide receiver talent. He's also just a really freaking good running back. With J.K. Dobbins, my issue with him is he's sort of like a poor man's Nick Chubb, and people are like, "Oh, that's great." Actually, I'm not drafting Nick Chubb anywhere, so it's kind of like a diss. But it's just, one of my bold calls last year was J.K. Dobbins will lead the league in yards per carry. #vault me. That's exactly what happened. It wasn't a hot take; it was an easy one, just because the Konami code effect, Lamar Jackson, hypermobile quarterbacks. Help with ground game efficiency. And so I see him as like Mark Ingram from 2 years back, where he's capped at like 40% of the rushing XTD. Lamar Jackson's going to vulture rushing touchdowns. Gus Edwards isn't going away. He's capped at like 55 to 60% of the non-QB carries. And then how many targets? Like 10 to 25. But I do expect him to remain one of the most hyper-efficient running backs in fantasy. Just that offense is so money. I think he's a really talented running back, and it's just a great offense to be in. But those are my tier 4 guys, so I'm really not ending up with too much of them.
Yeah, speaking of guys we're not ending up with too much of, we kind of talked a little bit off air about these guys. So if you're at the 3rd and 4th round turn and maybe you haven't been able to land a running back, maybe it just got away from you, you have Myles Sanders, David Montgomery, Chris Carson, and Josh Jacobs. Is there any guy in that group who really stands out that if they fall into round 5 or something, or late round 4, that you're probably running to the podium to grab?
Yeah, I'm very low on Josh Jacobs. I'm very, very low. I have David Montgomery, the highest of all of those running backs. Really, it all just comes down to Tariq Cohen. Like, that's the big thing. You could talk about strength of schedule, which I did. You could talk about Nagy no longer calling plays, which I did. You can talk about a lot of, Justin Fields effect, what that might mean. I talk about all that, but really the big thing at the end of the day is Tariq Cohen. Does he come back and serve that scat back role? Or does David Montgomery get rewarded with the full-on bell cow workload we saw from him last season, where he was highly effective? And I think he should get that. I think that the team is much better off going that route rather than tipping off your play calling hands. Okay, Tariq Cohen comes in, you're going to throw the ball. Okay, David Montgomery comes in, you're going to run the ball. And so I have Montgomery the highest just because of that bell cow upside, where he was seeing mid-range RB1 volume last year with Cohen out by snap share, by XFP. So if he gets that again, I mean, he's a great value. It's just a question of if. And Tariq Cohen's injury status right now is not good. No lock to even play week 2 or week 3 or whatever. So, but we haven't heard anything out of camp other than Nagy wants to give him about 20 carries. We'll see.
What about, so no worries about Damien Williams, really?
Are you podcasting from your garage?
Yeah, well, I just have my window like wide open and Buddy's like working on a Volkswagen or something, so good on him, but yeah, like bad timing, yeah. Maybe if I see the Volkswagen in the future, I'll get the window
Damien Williams, I'm just not really concerned. I don't think he's maybe, but like the talent level there in comparison to what we saw from Montgomery last year, I don't know. I'm not sure.
So what is Chris Carson? Like, I think of Chris Carson as like the poorest man's Nick Chubb or Derrick Henry. He shows up just behind those kind of guys when it comes to yards after contact and some forced missed tackles and stuff like that. Since coming into the league, he's been a very pants on fire runner. I appreciate Chris Carson's game, But, you know, he's still suppressed in his average draft position. He still goes in that 3rd to 4th round range. And Carlos Hyde is gone. It's just Rashad Penny and some ancillary pieces there. Do you think that he comes with some pass catching upside, or do you think he is just that one-dimensional workhorse type back?
No, he's Aaron Jones light to me, is what he is. And I think that's a really good comparison where it's, you know, not a committee, not a scat back. He's just, for whatever reason, inexplicably capped at like 60% of the team snaps with even work as both a rusher and receiver. It's a great offense to be in. It should be an even better, more fast-paced offense this year. He feels like a guarantee to beat his ADP, which makes him a great best ball play. But start sit, I'm a little more hesitant. I don't see the bell cow upside. I don't see the, you know, league-winning upside. I think he's going to remain capped at like 60% of the team snaps for whatever reason, and then he carries an extraordinary amount of injury risk.
Yeah, definitely. Once you get to that 4th, 5th round turn, I am actually really interested in some of these running backs. I actually don't mind dipping my toe back into the running back waters right around this range of the draft. And you're usually looking at, or I am at least, Travis Etienne, Javonte Williams, Kareem Hunt, and somebody we mentioned in Myles Gaskin. Is there somebody who really jumps off the page there, or are you like me kind of trying to attack the back end of that RB2 of your rankings?
No, it's definitely Etienne and Gaskin.
Me too.
a tier higher than Javonte, although Javonte is technically the next player, but there's a big teardrop for me. And then Kareem Hunt, I have like 2 tiers below. He's just a committee back, and you're banking on Cleveland winning fewer games than expected this year, or an injury to Nick Chubb, in which case he's a league winner. But you know, the rates on that aren't worth betting on, I don't think. Yeah, I mean, Etienne and Gaskin are super, super interesting to me. Etienne, the hope with him is he's Urban Meyer's Percy Harvin or Curtis Samuel. And remember, those guys were averaging like 27 fantasy points per game. Granted, it was college, but 27 fantasy points per game, despite only handling like 25% of the rushing work out of the backfield. That's just like obscene. So, you know, sort of Ekeler-esque is what you're hoping for. Though I talked to a good friend, a high-level NFL insider and source who told me he thinks Etienne's just the bell cow. It's not going to happen until midseason or later, but he's going to be the bell cow, which, okay. And then Gaskin, massive bell cow upside. Like, he's a guy I keep coming back to him where it's like, am I really being honest with my rankings here? There's the risk that, you know, Malcolm Brown steals rushing touchdowns, or it's a 3-way committee with Brown and Salvin Ahmed. I don't know. But like, he was a bell cow last year, and when he was healthy, and he was great in that role. If you just like look at the numbers he put up, he was putting up like mid-range RB1 numbers by both volume and production, good volume in the passing game. This is an offense we expect to take a sizable leap forward. Yeah. So from week 5 until the end of the season, he averaged 15.7 carries, 4.5 targets, 19.7 fantasy points, 18.0 XFP, and 69% of the team snaps. So if over the full season, that would have ranked 8th, 4th, 3rd, 8th in snap share, 4th in XFP, and 5th in XFP, and 4th in fantasy points per game. So like mid-range RB1, if he's exactly who he was last year when healthy, and he's being drafted as what, like a early RB3?
Yeah, like he is RB24 in FFPC drafts since July 1st. It's crazy. And he was an RB24 or better in 7 of 9 games when healthy last year. And yeah, he was running back 12 points per game. And I think this is all under the guise that Malcolm Brown does, you know, maybe even see the majority of goal line carries. I mean, Gaskin's one issue was that he did only convert on 3 of 9 attempts at the goal line last year, whereas I think Malcolm Brown's 8 for 15 from inside the 5-yard line during his career. But you're drafting him at his floor. There's no question. And it goes back to that pass catching upside. I mean, he was top 5 in terms of market share at the running back position last year. And I think he's really, at the very least, going to put a wrench in some of this market share and what, is more likely a pretty run heavy, or at least a safer offense than people might be imagining in Miami, with that top 10 defense, in my opinion, and a very tough division they play in. So yeah, he was top 5 in catches per game by running back and in yards per reception. And, he had 8.5 yards after the catch per reception. So I think Myles Gaskin really showed 3 down upside. And you can look at, there was multiple Miami backs who were top 10 in red zone touches per game last year. So some of these pass catches, some of these targets are even coming in high leverage areas of the field. So I really, really like Myles Gaskin heading into 2021. And I really like, what's his name as well? The guy we were talking about before, Travis Etienne, because I just don't see, I loved James Robinson last year, but I think we have to be really liquid. I think that was some of the context we applied to the running back position overall off the top of the show. And it sucks to see James Robinson get done like that, but Travis Etienne was definitely prioritized by Urban Meyer in this offense. And if we have one problem with Urban Meyer so far, it's that he seems to be very set in his ways. So it won't surprise me one bit if he is kind of rolling out in that role by midseason. So does that make James Robinson massively overvalued right now? Because he's still going in that 6th round range around guys like Mike Davis and Chase Edmonds.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably a fine best ball pick, but I'm not going to take him any start-sit leagues. They also talk about Hyde, Hyde's going to get work. I don't know. It's weird.
Urban Meyer's boy. Yeah. So what about Mike Davis or Chase Edmonds? Do any of those guys jump off the page to you? Because I kind of like both of them.
Yeah, I'm pretty low on Chase Edmonds. That goes back to my post-draft presser piece where Cliff Kingsbury, I don't even know if he was asked about the running backs. I think he just volunteered it, where he said he wants James Conner in the Kenyon Drake role, which makes it seem to me like Edmonds isn't going to see this massive boost in volume. I mean, granted, Conner can't stay healthy, but and then who was the other name you mentioned?
Mike Davis, who's somebody I'm just ridiculously high on compared to ECR for some reason.
Right. So the argument with Mike Davis is basically the same as Gaskin, maybe Michael Carter, where it's just, hey, there's really no other competition for touches there. Maybe he gets that bell cow workload and he smashes. It should be a potent offense in Atlanta. And the only reason I have Gaskin higher is because all reports out of camp so far have been, glowing, or just they haven't really touched on it with Gaskin. Whereas Arthur Smith came out and said, yeah, well, we don't have a Derrick Henry here, so we're going to be a running back by committee. And so I'm just going to take him at his word for that. So I bumped Davis down significantly after that.
Yeah, I think I would go to bat for Davis just in the sense where, when there is nobody there, I think he'll get the first touches, and I'm betting on him succeeding for some reason. I just think his pass catching prowess, I think he's a little more elusive than people give him credit for. And I just think we have to remember Atlanta's a 7.5 win total team in all sports books. So I think that, and I actually really dislike their strength of schedule, even the little things like every NFL team plays at least 7 games at home during the fantasy schedule, except the Atlanta Falcons, who only get 6 home games, which is crazy. And Mike Davis, he was top 10 in targets, catches, and receiving yards among running backs last year. And a lot of people are saying, they point to Carolina pretty quick, but Davis was also top 10 in yards after the catch. No running back forced more missed tackles through the air than Mikey D. And it wasn't just by air, it was by land. He had the majority of his yards come after contact because Carolina was basement dwellers when it comes to yards before contact. So I really like Mike Davis. I think at running back 27 prices on MFL 10 ADP since July 1st, I think that's kind of a steal. At least he's being drafted at his floor. And I think it's somebody who can pay off his upside via pass catching because, I'm not saying that he's going to out-target Kyle Pitts or Russell Gage even, but I think he's in that conversation for who we need to account for when you're game planning for the Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, he was also quietly great last year. If you just look at a number of different efficiency metrics, he just tailed off. Yeah. I just think no one cares. At the end of the day, he's a low draft capital running back. And we saw what just happened to James Robinson despite his monster year. And so, how much money is he getting paid? It's nothing, right? Yeah, totally. But they had nothing to pay anybody. I think that was part of the problem. Fair, Atlanta's going to probably run to the free agency pool next year as well. Yeah, maybe he went there then to get, a good idea for him. To hit free agency again. Who knows? That's a good call. Speaking of hitting free agency soon, Melvin Gordon is still in front of Javonte Williams. The camp reports have been kind of frustrating if you're a Javonte Williams, proponent.
I also have Trey Sermon and Darrell Henderson in this range. Darrell Henderson's ADP is obviously going to skyrocket because I pulled this since July 1st. How high is too high for Hendo? What do you think?
Yeah, maybe I'm just shook after last year because I loved Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I loved Ronald Jones. And then I got screwed when inexplicably Leonard Fournette gets cut, Le'Veon Bell gets cut. They join those respective teams. So I feel like I keep waiting for Los Angeles to like make a move, maybe trade for Kareem Hunt. Like how amazing would that be if you have Hunt? But yeah, so maybe I'm just shook there. I have Henderson fairly low, but it's one of those things where, okay, if it's, early September and nothing happens, then I'll probably bump him up.
No, I think that's interesting, but I bet you won't own very much of him then because so will everyone else. Like, I think Darrell Henderson is a very trendy player, no doubt about it. I was very high on Henderson as well. I think the situation might be a little tiny bit overblown when it comes to how incredibly run heavy the Rams have actually been in the Jared Goff era inside the 10-yard line. That could be a little different with Matthew Stafford and just Henderson and this committee backfield that they're looking to head into 2021 with, and how much they've relied on touchdowns being scored from inside the red zone. I just think they're going to score more touchdowns from outside the red zone like good offenses usually do. And we know the Rams are a good offense, and now they probably have a good quarterback as well. What about Melvin Gordon and Trey Sermon? These are two guys that I think are pretty good values in this range, but I really like Trey Sermon this year.
Yeah, well, I certainly don't like Melvin Gordon with Javonte Williams breathing down his neck. I think, best case scenario, it's like a 50-50 committee for Melvin. And even that, where, you could see Javonte, turning that into, 70-30 in his favor in the tail end of the season. Trey Sermon, I actually like Raheem Mostert more, but I have them neck and neck. You want to make your pitch for Sermon over Mostert?
Well, I mean, Raheem Mostert I like as well, and I'm definitely higher than ECR. I just worry, he came into camp a little tiny bit banged up, which I just didn't love to see. He's a little bit older, obviously doesn't have some of those allegiance tied to him. I know that's not something we've always prioritized when it comes to a Shanahan running back, Kyle or Daddy. But, the draft capital is kind of there for Trey Sermon all of a sudden. They spent third-round draft capital on this guy, and I think this offensive line is one of the best in the biz. I love this outside zone scheme, of course. I think behind Trey Lance we'll have this awesome RPO action going on, and I just think the running back production is pretty undeniable behind Kyle Shanahan. We don't have to go back too far to remember Carlos Hyde kind of capturing that backfield. It feels like maybe he's trying to replicate that a little bit. And there is some juicy work to be had in this backfield when you think of Jerick McKinnon leaving, Tevin Coleman. Finally, they made some agreement where he can go run his extortion gambit on someone else that he has something on, I guess, in New York. But I think the elite strength of schedule comes into play in this because especially when you look at the playoff strength of schedule for the 49ers, it is by far the best in the NFL. And I think this will be the guy, Trey Sermon, come weeks 14 to 17 when you're trying to win a fantasy championship that you're really going to want to own because the stars might be aligning at that point. I'm even grabbing like Elijah Mitchell and Wayne Gallman shares as well.
Yeah. So again, I'm fairly low on Cleveland's backfield, but to me, San Francisco, their backfield carries very similar upside at, a discount of 5 or 6 rounds, or maybe not that high, but yeah. So I like Sermon and Mostert both. I mean, Raheem Mostert, both of them, by the way, have the 5th softest schedule of any running back group. Mostert has the most improved schedule among running backs. They're going to have great game script. 49ers offense, I think, smashes, especially once Trey Lance takes over. And this is a guy who ranks 2nd best all time in career yards per carry. Hall of Famer Marion Motley ranks 1st, and then all-time legend Bo Jackson ranks 3rd.
Tecmo Bowl cheat.
So if you look back 2 years ago, Raheem averaged 20 fantasy points per game over his final 8 games, including the postseason. And then last year, before his first of 2 IR designations, he averaged 22.7 fantasy points per 4 quarters. About 16.7 carries, 3.7 targets, 150.7 yards from scrimmage. He was just hyper efficient. And that's like, despite, he was injured in week 2, he was limited in week 5, he played just 2 quarters in week 6. So that really obscures the numbers. So I see upside, I see talent. And then the argument for Sermon is, well, the guy can't stay healthy, which, okay, fair point. And Sermon, hey, he had a weird college career. He transferred, he dealt with injuries himself. But we saw at the tail end of last season in that bell cow role just absolutely dominate. And that was a player, Wes Huber, was, fought me all offseason on. He's like, you need to get this guy higher. You need to get this guy higher.
Somebody who changed my opinion on him drastically. Totally.
Yeah.
And just really quick, like that Ohio State team that he was dominating with, like a lot of people were saying, he can go wherever. He played in Oklahoma, played in Ohio State. And I was the guy saying, like, no, he needs to go to an outside zone scheme. Look at what he did in an outside zone scheme compared to what he did in Oklahoma. But I do like that he has, experience with mobile quarterbacks in an RPO outside zone scheme. And I think there might actually be room for both of these guys to pay off their ADPs and even coexist, because Mostert can dominate on early downs, I think, and Trey Sermon can do whatever. And they, my worry is, how involved is Gallman? How involved is a third body? How involved is Kyle fucking Juszczyk? Like, these are the guys that I think we actually have to worry about a little bit. But when you look at it, in its totality, like the 49ers were top 10 in carries, rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, catches, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns by running backs last year combined. They had over 30 touches per game, scored over 30 fantasy points per game from the running back position. I know Trey Lance is going to cut into that a little bit, but I don't think so much so that these guys aren't still pretty good values just because of the ambiguity in this backfield that I think is pushing these guys down fantasy boards. So what do you think of these guys who are kind of falling down fantasy boards? I really think I know what your answer is going to be here, but Damien Harris, Ronald Jones, and Michael Carter is probably who I'm looking at in the 8th round here.
Yeah, Damien Harris, I think, was a great best ball pick. And, I like his upside. Once Mac Jones takes over, the offense is a little bit better. Cam Newton isn't going to vulture as many rushing touchdowns. But yeah, Michael Carter is really my guy. Also, every time I say his name or I think about him, I think about the fact that JFK's, I guess, like pseudonym when he was banging interns was Michael Carter.
Really?
Hey, Michael Carter here. Just like, so I have to just like the JFK voice comes to my head. I just think about,
did you ever watch Clone High? That show Clone High back in the day?
That was an underrated show.
That was a good one. Yeah. Good JFK character in that one.
So anyway, he's just sort of like the discount Gaskin, Mike Davis to me, where there's like no other competition. The beat writers are saying he's basically already the team's RB1. He's a highly competent pass catcher, which is going to be important given the state of this offense and their dreadful defense and the offensive line. So tons of checkdowns. I didn't really love him as a talent. Like he was definitely like a tier after the big 3. And I question his bell cow upside, but like given the other running backs on that team, I mean, Tevin Coleman makes the most sense. Like early on in the offseason, I was projecting him at like, I don't know, like 70% of the carries, but like all the reports we've heard from our NFL insiders are he does not look good. And Michael Carter is really, winning the day in Jets training camp. So I don't know, just amazing value. Like I definitely don't like his upside as much as an Etienne or a Myles Gaskin, but just like a guarantee to beat his ADP. And there's some upside there for sure.
Totally. What do you think that offense looks like really quick? I'm struggling. We're expecting, I guess, a little bit of do you expect it more like a Shanahan 49ers offense, or do you expect it more like a Rams McVay offense, like a little more wide receiver oriented, or do you expect this outside zone scheme and like maybe Ty Johnson's playing the Mostert role and it's an RBBC thing going on?
Yeah, I honestly have no idea, but we know if it's, Shanahan-esque, that's really good for ground game efficiency. I don't know. I struggle with the Jets offense. Like, they should go extremely pass heavy. Zach Wilson, looks like he's 16 years old, and like the offensive line is garbage. And they really need Elijah Moore to hit. I really need Elijah Moore to hit because but like that. They need him to be a superstar. Luckily, I think he is one, but otherwise, like the worst cornerback core like I've seen in years. Like it's going to be a mess. And I don't know. But I don't know what it looks like. But in Carter's case specifically, I'm just hoping for, I don't know, like 60 plus targets and maybe 40% of the rushing work.
Absolutely. And I think it will definitely come down to pass catching with Michael Carter. I just want to pause and take a time out and thank our wonderful sponsors over at the Fantasy Points Media Group, fantasypoints.com. I just can't boast enough about them. Two number guys that are, must be on your Twitter list and stuff like that in season. Scott Barrett, obviously tonight's guest, and Graham Barfield. Scott and Wes Huber as well are also top of the field when it comes to DFS resources that you should have at your fingertips in season. Wes Huber is also like the guy to follow when it comes to Devy. And talk about crushing it on both ends of the spectrum, both you guys. Tom Brawley, though, he will make you money betting on football. Simple as that. Greg Cosell will break down the tape better than anybody, especially all of us that try. Edwin Porras will give you the skinny on every injury. He's just an elite injury analyst in the fantasy world. Jules McLean's got high stakes on lockdown. You got John Hansen, the legend. All the guru goats are pretty much at fantasypoints.com now, which means elite waiver wire information and advice in season, including Joe Dolan's rankings, one of the most accurate rankers year in and year out. And that's to go along with just dozens of others that I failed to mention, all of the tools that are available on fantasypoints.com. Like, you would really be behind the eight ball already if you aren't subscribed already. But 21 True North 10, all caps, that's the promo code just in case. I think about a conversation on the Fantasy Football Hustle, which is Dwayne McFarlane and Brian Drake's Diddy. And he threw out, they had Dr. Abib Egbatoba on the podcast, who is back-to-back Fantasy Guys main event champion. They had him on the podcast, arguably the best fantasy football player on the planet. And he threw out fantasypoints.com unsolicited as an invaluable resource to have at your fantasy, at your fingertips for fantasy. So, 100% of rich doctors are recommending fantasypoints.com. They're doing something right. So you mentioned hit rates and stuff. Do you not pay attention to that when you think about when should I dive back in at the running back position? You mentioned that you go running back quite often. You might even be inclined to go running back. So when do you feel comfortable diving back in at the running back position? Because we know we have to take our quarterbacks, our tight ends in this kind of range as we get into the double-digit rounds here.
Yeah, hit rates, again, miss the fundamental point, and that's upside. It's just like sloppy one-dimensional analysis. What I prefer to look at is expected WAR by ADP. And that's a great stat that one of our other really talented writers, Jeff Henderson, invented. We have it up on the site. It's basically like VORP, value over replacement player, on steroids, quantifying in real terms how many wins above replacement you can expect a player to add to your team. And by looking at that, the data is very clear. RB to start, maybe RB if you get the right round 3 running back. That's fairly optimal. It's going to have some more content coming out soon. And then when do I dip my toes back into the RB dead zone? It has to be the right guy. Maybe, an extreme ADP faller in the right spot. Like I said, I don't like Josh Jacobs, but let's say he falls an additional, 2 or 3 rounds, something crazy. Yeah, I'll be happy to grab him. But it's really identifying those right guys. And to me, it's Gaskin and Etienne who are standing out. Michael Carter standing out. The San Francisco running backs standing out. And then outside of that, I really neglect the running back position. I go quality over quantity. I want those running backs early. And then if I go RB, I might not draft another running back until like the last 2 rounds. I'll grab a Samaje Perine type who has injury upside and nothing else.
And a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And a lot of this running back stuff that we're talking about actually extends into the season when it comes to the waiver wire. It's definitely the position that we're most focused on when it comes to that aspect of our fantasy league. So you don't win your drafts at the you don't win your leagues at the fantasy draft, and it's because you usually have to hit on a running back like a Mike Davis in your waiver wire early on in the season. Dump that FAAB. So if Aaron Jones was to get hurt, AJ Dillon would be that guy. Oh my good Lord. But he is going in like that 9th round range, Scott, and you kind of talked me off the ledge about AJ Dillon before the show. he's going in the range with like a Zach Moss and a James Conner right now. So is AJ Dillon the guy you dislike out of those three? And is there a guy that you like out of Zach Moss and James Conner a lot more?
Yeah, so I don't really like Zach Moss. Devin Singletary is still there, although I think he stinks, and I think Zach Moss is way better. But also, it's one of the most pass-heavy teams in the league, and Josh Allen's going to vulture rushing touchdowns. So it's A.J. Dillon. What was the other name?
Zach Moss, James Conner, A.J. Dillon.
Yeah, and so James Conner assumed full health, and the other guy gets hurt. Ideally, it's similar upside. Maybe even James Conner has more upside in the sense that A.J. Dillon probably isn't going to be catching passes, even if Aaron Jones goes, like, at least on paper, right? And then, so what's their standalone value? I think it's fairly similar. I mean, I definitely like A.J. Dillon more, but when we were talking about before the show, it's like, who is my priority, sort of handcuff type? And that's Latavius Murray. I think he has similar standalone value to Dillon. I think Dillon's is probably at least a little bit higher, but I mean, his highest snap games came when Taysom Hill was starting, and we saw like weird usage there where he really did see an expanded role. But more so, what's his upside? Like A.J. Dillon, if Aaron Jones goes down, I don't see a lot of targets. But Latavius Murray, if Alvin Kamara goes down, has like that Kareem Hunt upside if Chubb goes down, where it's like top 5 fantasy running back seems very plausible. Kamara missed 2 games in 2020. What happened? Averaged 24 carries, 9 targets, 150 yards from a scrimmage, 34.4 fantasy points per game. And so we've really seen Peyton go that route, where if one of his 2 guys is out, Mark Ingram had a suspension. Alvin Kamara was averaging like 35 fantasy points per game. Even last year, Ty Montgomery had like -4 rushing yards throughout the entirety of the season. He breaks off a 100-yard game in week 17. So I like those guys. The problem with the handcuff types is you're banking on an injury, which almost never happens. Like, I had a lot of James Conner the year Le'Veon Bell went out, but that was a unique situation, and he was free. And so I'm almost never drafting these. I get it. You get Latavius Murray and Alvin Kamara goes down, and you get A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones goes down. Like, that upside is like unimaginable. It's just like, I have a hard time given how often that occurs and how really they are, just like dead weight for unless that happens. And I am grabbing my running backs early, and then I'm loading up on wide receivers. So I just don't often go that route, but I get it.
And the 9 targets by Latavius Murray in that game is just outrageous. Like, I'm not sure A.J. Dillon sees that in his standalone role, if Aaron Jones stays healthy for 17 games in 2021. And I think that's what you talked me off the ledge with, is that it's not necessarily the startability or anything. And I tried to argue that, I'm willing to drop these guys, especially in my home league. Once we get into this range of the draft, I don't make any bones about where I drafted them. If I need to drop them and I'm 0-3, I'll do it. If I'm 3-0, I'm probably pumped I have Latavius Murray
So actually, I don't know that I draft him in a home league. I play that more conservatively with like, okay, RB, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, and whatever. But in maybe an FFPC high stakes league, I think that does make a lot of sense, where you're, the main event, you're trying to finish first out of, 1,800 teams. Yeah. And so the upside they give you, that's a little more valuable in that format.
And just to go back to Latavius Murray and stuff, the Saints, and it is a lot to do with Sean Payton. It's not just Drew Brees, but it has been a secret weapon for all time eternity. Like, if I go back in the last 10 years, this is how many fantasy points in PPR the running back position is combined for the New Orleans Saints. First, second, 8th, and then first last year. The New Orleans Saints scored the most fantasy points at the running back position last year.
I remember when I found that stat like 3 years ago, and I thought it was incredible. And then it's just like first, another 3 years.
It's incredible. And I think the 2019 small dip gave us, a little bit of a buy opportunity or a window here. While I'm on the Saints and while I have you here, and because you're too kind with your time, what do you think with the Michael Thomas injury? Do you think that makes the Saints more inclined to go with Taysom Hill? And what do you think that does with Alvin Kamara if it is Taysom Hill under center or in shotgun?
So I think it certainly should. They certainly should lean more towards Taysom. because, and apparently like all reports out of camp are it's basically even in terms of passing, in which case it's like, well, why wouldn't you just play the two-dimensional guy as opposed to the one-dimensional guy who's the same as the other guy in that one dimension? Like, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. And, months ago, Adam Kaplan and Greg Cassell came on our podcast and they both said, they think Taysom wins the job outright. Where betting odds had it like 70-30 in Winston's favor. What does the offense look like? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. And it's kind of scary, especially given how high I have Alvin Kamara. But at the end of the day, I trust Sean Payton to get the ball in the hands of his best players. And that's certainly Alvin Kamara. Maybe more 2 running back sets with him split out wide, something along those lines. I do think Troutman's probably the second most valuable player after Kamara from the receivers. But I mean, Marquez Callaway is showing out, and he's a player Greg Cassell always liked.
And I think they liked Marquez Callaway, just for the record, too. Like, he was the guy they were looking to on possession downs, like third downs and stuff. So I think that's a good call, too. I'm looking at some pretty ugly pass catchers, and we've actually mentioned some of these guys already. So J.D. McKissic, I don't think either of us are interested in them, but actually, maybe I should preface this. Like, you said you're not really interested in any of these pass catching backs. When it comes to your redraft leagues, you have more interest when it comes to a best ball perspective. Is that because you don't see them gaining a role if somebody was to get injured in front of them? Like, you just see a flat, kind of steady range of outcomes for them?
So there's definitely that, but it's also predictability. So in a best ball league, J.D. McKissic and Nyheim Hines were 2 of your top league winners in a best ball. They were fairly useless in a start sit, because if you just combine their boom games together and treat them as one player, which you can in a best ball, they're putting up Aaron Jones type numbers. But in a start sit league, you are never starting them in the right weeks. I think it was something like in J.D. McKissic's 5 most started games, he averaged 7.1 fantasy points per game. And then his 5 least started games, he averaged like 16.1 fantasy points per game. So you're just never getting those guys right. And so the value they bring to your team was very negative. Where in a best ball, it's very positive. You don't have to sweat over start sit. You just get all the good and none of the bad.
Totally. And so the reason I ask that is because these guys are pretty one-dimensional, or at least they really fall into that bucket for me. When it comes to J.D. McKissic, James White, Tariq Cohen, we talked a little bit about. Maybe he would be going at the top of that tier had we not had the injury news that we have and just the trouble. It's worrisome when you think about a guy who relies entirely on his athleticism dealing with these kind of injuries. But Kenneth Gainwell kind of stands out to me because we didn't mention Miles Sanders, but he's definitely somebody that is in a void on most people's boards right now. So we expect a pretty run-heavy offense, I would imagine, in Philadelphia. It's not going to be like a West Coast Frank Wright thing. It's going to be a RPO-heavy offense. So what do you think Kenneth Gainwell's role is, and do you think his ADP is justified right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not taking him in a start sit. And then even in best ball, there's the chance that Miles Sanders is who he was last year, which was a bell cow, or just about. Shockingly, I don't even know, like an all-time outlier, he ranked 20th in XFP per game, 20th in fantasy points per game. I mean, dealt with multiple injuries, but he's still like ranked top 3 in yards per carry. It was just sort of like inexplicable. Although part of that's also the Konami code quarterback, which is still there, still an issue. And then it's, okay, so what do we do with Sirianni? Is it going to be sort of like the Indianapolis offense, which is what he's hinted at, in which case, like, Sanders is screwed. Taylor should have been a bell cow last year. He wasn't. And then is Gainwell the Nyheim Hines? That's a fairly valuable role in best ball. But Sanders is no slouch as a pass catcher. It's just like a really murky, troubling situation for me where I'm kind of just not drafting Miles Sanders. And then I loved Gainwell. My model loved Gainwell. The draft capital was very, very low, alarmingly low. Mm-hmm. And it's I just don't see the upside and start sit. And then maybe even best ball, I'd rather have a James White. He was my whipping boy for last year's edition of Upside Wins Championships. He had like an RB 18 ADP. It made no sense. But this year he's actually like a pretty good value, especially in best ball. Rex Burkhead's no longer there. Mac Jones, if he's starting, that's good news for him. So if in a best ball, I'm probably taking James White over Gainwell, just more certainty with regard to role.
Yeah, and I think that's really well said. And I think everything you've said is really well said tonight, because the vibe I'm getting is that Mr. Bell Cow or Bust is pretty Bell Cow or Bust. You know, you're going to start out heavy running back and fill out your roster the rest of the way and rely on the waiver wire when it comes to your running back position depth, because that's what it's there for, so to speak. So before I go, I just love to let you throw out there what you're working on besides your My Guys episode that we, are so excited to get our hands on tomorrow. But what exactly are you kind of gearing up towards while we get into training camps here and into preseason action that we didn't even have last year?
Yeah. So next on the docket is My Guys. And then after that, probably the last article I write is going to be 96 stats. Everyone loves that article. Mm-hmm. And then I don't really have anything I have to do. I honestly might take some time off at my cousin's wedding, so I have to travel across the country for that. I'll probably do like a what you need to know from the preseason games. If it's like, oh my God, Miles Sanders is actually playing on 100% of the team snaps for the first string and Gainwell looks like shit. That's something that's going to factor into my rankings, and I'll talk about that. Maybe I'll do an article breaking down the offensive coordinators. It's important I do that, but it's like so time consuming. I'll also take requests. Like I'll see what guys in our Discord want me to write, or people on Twitter want me to write. So it's probably not just those 2 or 3 articles, but I have the leeway to sort of do whatever I want.
And that's the beauty of fantasypoints.com. I think you have quite the team to pick you up. If you want some time off, that would be unbelievably much deserved. There's lots of guys who can definitely pick up the Slack or the Discord.
Yeah. And by the way, My Guys will be updated throughout the entirety of the off season. So rankings might change here or there. If, news out of camp is that Trey Sermon's the guy, or I'm going to move him up. So yeah.
That's and those rankings, like a lot of the stuff we talked about, I can't believe I didn't mention it, by the way. Bell Cow Report, strength schedule metric. This stuff is in the description. The links are there. So is fantasypoints.com. So is Scott Barrett's rankings. Joe Dolan's rankings are in there. But yeah, make sure you're following Scott, everybody, at Scott Barrett DFB on Twitter. Find out why almost 70,000 people are. Formerly of PFF.com, we know him now as the co-owner of fantasypoints.com, director of Dank Stats over there, and nominated for DFS FSWA Writer of the Year last year. So make sure you're following this guy. Make sure you're following this guy for DFS. I know you don't like me bringing that one up.
Yeah, no, definitely follow me for DFS. I'm going to win $1 million this year. I feel it.
Yeah, and you were kind of selling it like, you won't even hear from me during the season, but I just wanted to let, I had to bring it up. I didn't bring it up in the intro, but if you're going to make it sound like you're not going to be around during the season, I just got to remind folks that not only will you be, but, you're making people money.
Well, you gotta get into DFS and then we can have a conversation.
No, totally. I'm just struggling, like building the lineups. Like I do dabble. I just don't want to be offering advice at this point, I would say. Because it's a ruthless game out there. It's a ruthless game in that DFS world. I'm Tyrell McLaughlin at TNFF Tyrell. Really sorry we couldn't have Trav on the FB tonight. We will be back on Thursday. We have an absolutely massive guest. I'll give you a hint. He was the most accurate ranker of running backs last year at True North FFB on Twitter. I'm at TNFF Tyrell. It's at TCL14 for the Lord and Sealer. And until next time, peace. That was my best Trav piece.